The marble floor of the Kwan estate was the last thing that ever felt honest to me.
Please, don't go!
How dare you! Wait, please!
For 6 years, I was married to Jaeho Kwan.
You were never one of us.
Everyone in that house called me the American wife, like it was a diagnosis.
The marble floor of the Kwan estate was the last thing that ever felt honest to me. Cold under my heels, veined like something that had been alive once and had died mid-breath. I remember thinking that as I walked across it that night, in a white suit I had chosen on purpose, because white doesn't hide anything. It doesn't hide tears, and it doesn't hide blood, and I had promised myself years ago that I would never let anyone see either one come out of me in that house again. For 6 years, I was married to Jaeho Kwan, second son of the Kwan family, heir apparent to Silver Crane Holdings, the shipping and logistics empire that moved more product through the Busan port than any legal manifest could account for. Everyone in that house called me the American wife, like it was a diagnosis. Jaeho's mother, Madam Soo-jin Kwon, called me worse things in Korean when she thought I couldn't understand her. Not knowing I'd spent 4 years learning the language in the dark, alone, specifically so that no one in that family could ever whisper something about me to my face again. If you know exactly which grand staircase I'm describing, if you've stood underneath a chandelier like the one that hung in that foyer, if a city's name is already sitting on the tip of your tongue because you've seen a house exactly like this one comment the city below, I want to know how many of you have walked into a room built to remind you that you don't belong in it. I met Jaeho when I was 26. Working logistics compliance for a shipping conglomerate that had a joint venture with Silver Crane's legitimate freight division. I was the only person in that boardroom who caught that their manifests didn't match their bills of lading 3 quarters in a row. I flagged it. I didn't flag it to blackmail anyone or make a name for myself. I flagged it because sloppy paperwork gets people killed at sea. And I'd grown up with an uncle who died on a container ship because somebody upstream decided honesty was optional. Jaeho was the one who came to smooth it over. He was supposed to charm me into silence. Instead, he sat across from me for 6 hours while I walked him through every discrepancy. And at the end of it, he said something I've never forgotten. "You're the only person who's ever corrected me and made me feel richer for it, instead of smaller." I didn't know yet that his family measured every relationship in what it added or subtracted from their bottom line. I just knew a man who looked at competence like it was oxygen. I fell for that man. I did not know yet that the man and the family were the same animal wearing 2 different faces. My Uncle Robert died on a container ship off the coast of Charleston when I was 14, because a shipping company 3 tiers up the supply chain had falsified a weight declaration to save money on port fees, and the vessel's load balance was wrong in a way nobody discovered until the deck listed hard enough in open water to take 3 men over the side. Only one of them made it back. I grew up understanding, earlier than most people ever have to, that paperwork isn't bureaucracy. Paperwork is the only thing standing between an ordinary Tuesday and somebody's family getting a phone call they never recover from. I went into maritime compliance because I wanted to be the kind of person who catches the lie before the water does. Every single job I ever took after that, I took with my uncle's name somewhere in the back of my mind. A quiet promise that I would never let sloppy paperwork be the reason somebody didn't come home. That is the piece of myself Jaeho actually fell in love with, I think, in that 6-hour meeting. Not my face, not my composure under pressure, though he complimented both later. He fell for a woman who cared about the discrepancy in the manifest, more than she cared about the size of the room she was sitting in, more than she cared about impressing the future heir of a company that could have made her life effortless if she'd simply looked the other way. I have never once regretted caring about the manifest. I have only ever regretted how long it took me to understand that his family would spend the rest of my marriage trying to convince me that caring about the manifest made me small, when it was actually the only reason any of them could trust a single ship that ever left port under the Kwan name. We married 18 months later, in a ceremony his mother attended like she was inspecting cargo. I spent the next 6 years building the compliance and logistics arm of Silver Crane's legitimate front business from a broken, bleeding department into the most profitable division in the company, the one that laundered legitimacy across every port inspector and insurance auditor from Busan to Long Beach. I built the systems. I trained the staff. I signed my name on contracts that made his family richer by the tens of millions, and I did it quietly, the way you do when you've been taught that your value is supposed to be invisible so the men around you can take credit for the light. Madame Kwan never once said thank you. What she said, over dinner, in front of Jaeho, in front of his brother Inho, in front of staff who could hear every word, was this: a logistics manager makes a fine employee. She does not make a Kwan. She said it in the same, even, pleasant tone she used to order the next course, as though the sentence cost her nothing, as though she hadn't spent the entire dinner watching me correct a customs timeline error In-ho had gotten wrong in front of 2 investors an hour earlier, an error that would have cost the family a shipment worth $2 million if I hadn't caught it before dessert was served. Nobody at that table defended me. Jaeho looked down at his plate. In-ho smiled into his wine glass, satisfied, I think, that his mother had said out loud what he'd believed the whole time. I sat there with a fork in my hand and I did not cry. I have never cried in that house. Not once. Whatever anyone tells you about how that story ends, understand this first. I never gave them my tears, because tears were the one thing I still owned outright, and I was not going to hand my equity over for free. I want to tell you about the first year, because people always skip the first year when they tell these stories, and the first year is where the whole thing gets built. I moved into the Kwan estate 3 weeks after the wedding, into a wing of the house that had been decorated by a designer. Madame Kwan had flown in from Milan, every surface chosen to communicate a wealth so total it didn't need to explain itself to anyone. I remember standing in that room on my first night as a wife, looking at silk curtains that cost more than my mother's entire yearly salary back in Savannah, and thinking, I am going to have to earn my place in every single room in this house, because nobody here is going to hand it to me. So I did. I woke up at 5 every morning and reviewed customs manifests before anyone else in the house was awake. I taught myself maritime insurance law from textbooks I ordered under a different name, because I didn't want anyone in that house to see me studying, to see me needing to catch up to a world they'd been born inside of. Within a year, I had restructured the entire compliance department, cutting customs delays by 60% and saving the legitimate freight division an estimated $11 million annually in demurrage fees and insurance penalties. I did the math myself. I kept the spreadsheet myself, in a folder on a hard drive nobody in that house knew existed, because I had already learned, 1 year in, that the moment you hand a Kwan your proof of value, they file it under their own name and forget where it came from. Jaeho's father, before his stroke, was the one person in that family who ever said it to my face. He called me into his study 18 months into the marriage, an old man with a shipping empire and a son he no longer fully trusted to run it, and he said, in careful English, Simone, my wife will never say this, my sons will never say this, but I built this company on ships that sink if the paperwork is wrong, and you are the only person who has told me the truth about my own paperwork in 11 years. I am putting a clause in your contract that no one else will read closely enough to understand what it means. Use it well. That clause was the 3% equity stake. He signed it 4 months before his stroke took the last of his authority in that house, and he never explained to Madame Kwan or to In-ho what it actually meant, because he knew, even then, exactly what his wife would do if she understood the door he'd left open for me. The fake heiress arrived 8 months before the divorce papers did. Her name was Yerin Cho, and she came dressed as old money, speaking 3 languages, carrying a surname that Madame Kwan recognized from a shipping dynasty in Incheon the Cho Maritime Group, a name that opened doors in every port authority office from here to Rotterdam. Madame Kwan didn't just want Yerin in the family, she needed her. Silver Crane's shipping insurance had been quietly downgraded after 2 vessels were flagged for irregular customs declarations I had warned them about 18 months earlier and been overruled on by In-ho, who wanted the shipment volume more than he wanted the paperwork clean. A merger with Cho Maritime would have repaired that insurance rating overnight and opened 3 new port contracts that Silver Crane desperately needed to survive its next fiscal quarter. I want you to understand something about how these families actually work, because it is never about romance, and it was never about romance in that house. Every alliance is a balance sheet. Every marriage is a merger. Yerin Cho wasn't brought in because she was beautiful, though she was. She was brought in because her name, on paper, was worth an estimated $40 million in restored insurance credibility and new contract access. Madame Kwon had run those numbers before she'd run Yerin's name past her own son. Jaeho fought it, at first. I'll give him that much, though it costs me nothing now to be honest about it. He told his mother no, in this very foyer, in a conversation I overheard from the east hallway, because I had learned, in 6 years, exactly which hallways carried sound and which ones swallowed it. He said, "Simone built half of what we have. I will not throw her out to buy an insurance rating." His mother's answer was quiet, and it was final. "Then you will lose the company your grandfather built, and you will explain to your father's ghost why you let a woman from Georgia bury it with you." I want to walk you through the 6 weeks that followed that conversation, because this is the part of the story most people never get to see, the part that happens behind closed doors, while the wife is still setting the table for dinner every night like nothing has changed. Madame Kwon began inviting Yerin Cho to the estate under the pretense of charity board functions, seating her next to Jaeho at every dinner, angling the conversation always toward the insurance crisis, always toward the 3 new port contracts sitting just out of reach, always toward the phrase, "If only we had a partner whose name could open that door for us." She never once said my name in those conversations. She didn't need to. Erasure doesn't always look like an argument. Sometimes it looks like a woman quietly rearranging the seating chart at every dinner until you're the only person in the room without an assigned place. I watched it happen for 6 weeks, and I said nothing, because I had already started the audit by then, and a woman running an audit does not tip her hand by making a scene at a dinner party. I smiled. I passed the rice. I asked Yerin polite questions about her family's fleet in Incheon, and wrote down every answer that didn't add up later that night in a notebook I kept in a locked drawer in my own office, the one room in that house Madame Kwon had never once set foot in, because she considered compliance paperwork beneath her attention. That, more than anything else, is what that family never understood about me. They thought the boring work was the least important work. I built my entire escape route inside the boring work, because nobody with power in that house ever thought to look there. He came home that night, and he didn't tell me any of it. He let me find out from the paperwork 4 months later, from a courier who showed up at the door I'd walked through as a bride, holding an envelope with my name spelled wrong on it. Jaeho didn't hand me the papers himself. He let a stranger do it, and then he stood at the top of the staircase and watched me read them. And he said the only thing that mattered in that moment, which was nothing at all. I remember standing in the foyer with that envelope in my hands, reading my own name misspelled on legal documents that were about to erase 6 years of my life, and thinking about every night I had stayed late at the office, reconciling manifests so that his family's ships would clear customs without incident. I thought about the 2A. Calls from port authorities in Long Beach, the emergency filings I'd drafted from a hospital waiting room the week my mother had her hip surgery because a shipment was stuck in customs and nobody else in that company knew which regulator to call. None of that was in the envelope. None of that was ever going to be in any envelope that family produced, because the only ledger they kept was the one that showed up on a balance sheet, and 6 years of loyalty doesn't show up as a line item. The night this thumbnail freezes the night you're looking at right now, if you've seen the image, is the night everything came apart in front of 40 guests, 3 bodyguards, his mother, his aunt, and the woman he was supposed to marry in 6 weeks. I want to walk you through exactly how we got there, because nothing about that night was an accident. I built every second of it on purpose, the same way I built every logistics system in that company. Quietly, with paperwork nobody thought to read, over a timeline nobody thought I was smart enough to run. Here is what nobody in that family knew about me. 2 years before the divorce, I had used a clause in my original employment contract with Silver Crane's legitimate freight subsidiary, a clause I had drafted myself, because I drafted every contract in that division to negotiate a small equity stake in a joint compliance venture between Silver Crane and an American underwriting firm called Ashgrove Marine Assurance. It was 3%. Nobody blinked at 3%. 3% was a rounding error to a family who thought in tens of millions. But 3% of a compliance venture meant I had standing to request an independent audit of any partner being onboarded into that venture's insurance chain. And Cho Maritime Group, the moment Madame Kwon started angling to fold their name into Silver Crane's insurance restructuring, became a partner being onboarded into that chain. I didn't request the audit out of spite. I want to be precise about that, because precision is the only inheritance I ever got from that family that I actually kept. I requested the audit because something about Yerin Cho's paperwork had never sat right with me from the day I met her. She used the phrase, "our fleet in Incheon," 3 times over one dinner, and every time she said it, her eyes moved to Madame Kwon first, like she was checking whether the lie had landed, not sharing a fact she actually knew. The audit took 11 months. Ashgrove Marine Assurance doesn't move fast, and I didn't push them to, because a rushed audit gets buried and a slow one gets believed. I remember the exact week the first preliminary findings came back, because it was the same week Madame Kwon announced the engagement publicly, in a press release distributed to 4 regional shipping trade publications, naming Yerin Cho as the future of Silver Crane's next generation of maritime leadership. I read that press release standing in my own kitchen, the one at the estate where I had built Carter Assurance Group after midnight for 2 years, and I remember thinking, with a calm that surprised even me, that I finally understood exactly how much rope this family was going to need to hang itself with, and that my job now was simply to make sure the rope was long enough and strong enough to hold. Ashgrove's investigators pulled employment records from 3 different Cho Maritime subsidiaries, cross-referenced against immigration filings, university verification services, and a background check firm that specializes in exactly this kind of engineered biography. What it found, when it finally landed on my desk 4 weeks before that gala, was this. Yerin Cho was not the daughter of Cho Maritime Group's founder. She was the daughter of a mid-level operations manager who had worked for Cho Maritime for 11 years before being quietly terminated for falsifying cargo weight declarations on 2 vessels, the exact kind of fraud that had gotten Silver Crane's own insurance downgraded in the first place. Yerin had spent 3 years building a fabricated lineage, forged school records from a boarding school in Switzerland she'd never attended, and a professional history built on a job title that had been invented by a reputation management firm she'd paid $80,000 to construct her entire public identity. I sat with that file for 2 full days before I told anyone, including myself, what I was actually going to do with it. Part of me wanted to hand it to Jaeho privately, the way I'd handled everything else in that marriage, quietly, carefully, giving him the chance to fix his own family's mistake before it became public. I drafted that email 3 separate times. I deleted it 3 separate times. And on the 3rd draft, I finally admitted to myself the real reason I kept deleting it. I had given that family 6 years of private corrections, private warnings, private truths handed over a dinner table where no one but the 2 of us would ever know I'd been the one to see it first. Every single time. The correction got absorbed into the family's private ledger, and my name got erased from the credit. I was done making that mistake for free. She wasn't a Cho heiress. She was a woman marrying into a Mafia family to launder a fake pedigree into a real fortune. And Madame Kwon, so hungry to save her insurance rating, had never run a background check deeper than a surname. I sat on that audit for 4 weeks. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was strategy. I needed the timing to land where it would do the most damage, which meant the gala, in front of everyone whose good opinion Madame Kwon had spent her whole life curating. But part of it, if I'm being fully honest with you, the way I've promised to be in every one of these stories, was that I wanted to watch her build the whole wedding first. I wanted her to send the invitations. I wanted her to order the dress. I wanted her to stand in front of every business partner she'd been chasing for a decade and announce the merger publicly, so that when it collapsed in the one currency that family actually understood: reputation, priced in real time, in front of witnesses who would never let her forget it. The gala was billed as an engagement celebration, 6 weeks before the wedding date, at the Kwon family's ballroom estate outside the city, the same house you're looking at in that photo, the same staircase, the same chandeliers that had watched me get married and then watched me get erased. 40 guests, insurance underwriters, 2 Port Authority officials from Busan flown in specifically to be impressed. Madame Kwon in emerald silk, standing at the center of the room like a woman who had already won. I spent the morning before that gala the way I spend every morning before I do something that matters. Reviewing every document one more time, checking every citation, making sure that if a single person in that room challenged a single fact, I would have the page number ready before they finished the sentence. I chose the white suit deliberately. I have told you that already, but I want you to understand exactly why. In that family, White was reserved for weddings and funerals, the two events where a woman's presence was supposed to be entirely in service of someone else's story. I wore white that night because I was done attending other people's ceremonies. I was there to hold my own. I drove myself. I didn't take a car service because I wanted to walk in on my own timeline, and I wanted the last few minutes before I opened those doors to belong entirely to me. I remember sitting in the driveway for 4 minutes, engine off, folder in my lap, running through the sequence one final time. Walk to the center of the room. Do not look for Jaeho first. Set the folder down in front of Yerin. Speak once. Do not raise my voice. Do not explain more than the paperwork already explains. I had built entire compliance systems around exactly this kind of discipline, say only what the evidence supports, and let the evidence do the rest of the work. I was not going to abandon that discipline the one night it mattered most. I wasn't invited. I came anyway, because the audit gave me legal standing as a compliance stakeholder in the very insurance venture the merger was designed to repair, and because I had spent 6 years learning that the most powerful thing a quiet woman can do is walk into a room she was never supposed to enter and hand someone a folder they cannot ignore. I want to describe exactly what happened in that room, beat by beat, because it is the only night in 6 years I have ever felt the floor under my feet, instead of feeling like I was standing on someone else's. I walked in through the east entrance, the one that swallows sound. Jaeho saw me first. I watched every muscle in his face, try to decide whether to be furious or afraid, and settle, finally, on something closer to dread, because Jaeho had learned by then slowly, too late, that I did not walk into rooms without a reason. His mother saw me a half-second later, and her face did the thing it always did when she looked at me. A small, practiced contempt, like she was looking at a stain on an otherwise clean floor. I didn't raise my voice. I have never once raised my voice in that house, not in 6 years, and I wasn't going to start on the one night it would have actually cost me the advantage. I walked to the center of the room, past the underwriters, past the port officials, past the emerald silk and the string quartet that faltered mid-measure when they saw the shift in the air, and I set the folder down on the table in front of Yerin Cho. "Congratulations on the engagement," I said. "I brought you a gift. It's the audit report from Ashgrove Marine Assurance on the Cho Maritime Insurance restructuring. Page 4 has your actual employment history. Page 7 has the forged transcripts. Page 11 is the wire transfer to the reputation firm that built your entire public biography. I'd read it before the underwriters do, but they already have copies, because I sent them 4 hours ago, as is my right as a compliance stakeholder in the venture your merger was designed to repair. The silence that followed did not feel like victory. It felt like weather. It felt like standing at the center of a room while a storm system finished arriving, all at once, from every direction. Yerin's face didn't crumble the way you'd expect. It went very still, very fast, the way a person's face goes still when they've always known this day was coming and have simply been waiting to see which room it would happen in. Madame Kwan's face did something I had never seen it do in 6 years. It lost its composure entirely, in front of the 2 port officials she had spent a decade cultivating, in front of underwriters whose entire job was to price risk, standing in a room where the biggest risk in the building had just been named out loud with documentation. One of the underwriters, a man named Richard Ashgrove himself, who had flown in from the New York office specifically because his firm's name was attached to the venture, stood up from his chair and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "This merger is dead. My firm cannot underwrite a restructuring built on a fabricated lineage. We'll need to revisit Silver Crane's entire risk profile, effective immediately." That was the sentence that did it. Not my folder. Not my words. The market's words, spoken back to that family in the one language they had built their entire lives around. Silver Crane's insurance rating, the one Madame Kwan had spent a decade trying to protect, did not just fail to improve that night. It collapsed. Publicly, in front of the exact people whose confidence it depended on, because the fraud wasn't a rumor anymore. It was documented, time-stamped, distributed, and standing in the middle of the family's own ballroom in a dress that cost more than most people's cars. The 2 port officials from Busan exchanged one look between them and quietly left within 10 minutes, and I heard later that both of them declined, in writing, to move forward with the port contract negotiations Madame Kwan had spent a decade cultivating them for. Jaeho's aunt, a formidable woman I had always privately respected because she was the only other person in that family who ever read a contract before signing it, walked directly up to Madame Kwon in front of everyone remaining and said, loud enough for me to hear from across the room, "Soo Jin, you brought a stranger's forged name into this family to save an insurance rating, and you didn't run a single background check. I raised the question of vetting her 3 months ago, and you told me I was being paranoid." Madame Kwon did not answer her. There was, for the first time in the 6 years I had known her, nothing left in her arsenal to say. I stood at the edge of that room and watched the entire structure of a decade's worth of careful social engineering come apart in real time, guest by guest, phone call by phone call, as underwriters quietly stepped into the hallway to make calls to their own offices, as the 2 remaining trade journalists who had been invited to cover the wedding of the season began typing notes into their phones that I knew, even then, would become headlines by morning. I felt no triumph standing there. I want to be honest about that too, because these stories always want you to feel a burst of vindication in the moment, and what I actually felt was quieter than that. I felt relief. The specific, physical relief of finally setting down something heavy I had been carrying without complaint for 6 years. If you have ever watched someone's entire reputation come apart in real time, in a room they thought they controlled, comment the word that describes what that felt like to witness. I want to know what you'd call it. Jaeho came to find me 2 hours later, after most of the guests had left, after his mother had been escorted, not carried, escorted, because even collapse in that family has to look composed into a back-study with In-ho and 2 lawyers who billed by the 6-minute increment. He found me at the base of the staircase, the same one behind me in this exact photograph, and he said my name the way he used to say it in our first year of marriage before I became a line item. "You did this," he said. "Not a question. I did the audit," I said. "Your family did the rest. I just brought the paperwork to the party." "You could have told me privately." "I told you privately for 6 years, Jaeho. I told you privately when I flagged the customs discrepancies. I told you privately when I said the insurance downgrade was going to get worse before it got better. I told you privately the night your mother said a logistics manager doesn't make a kwon, and you stood at the top of these stairs and said nothing while I read my own divorce papers from a courier. I have no more private words left for this family. Everything I have left, I'm saying where it can be heard." He reached for my hand. "I want you to notice, if you're watching this and you've been in a room like this yourself, exactly how it happens, the hand doesn't come when things are good. It comes when the thing you built without them is suddenly the only asset in the room worth having. Simone, I made a mistake. My mother forced this. I never stopped. Loving me?" I said. "I believe you did love me, Jaeho. I don't think you're lying about that. But love was never the thing standing between us. A balance sheet was standing between us, and you let the balance sheet decide, and now the balance sheet has decided again, and this time it decided against your mother instead of against me. I'm not angry that you're standing here asking. I'm just done being anyone's contingency plan." He sat down on the second step of that staircase, the same one his mother had descended 100 times looking down at me like an inspector checking a shipment. And for the first time in 6 years, I watched him look genuinely lost, like a man realizing the map he'd been handed at birth had never once pointed toward anything true. "I don't know how to undo what she's spent 30 years building into me," he said. "I don't know how to be a kwon and be a person who deserves you at the same time. You don't have to figure that out tonight," I told him. "And you definitely don't have to figure it out with me. That was never my job, Jaeho. I was never hired to fix what your mother built wrong in you. I was your wife. I built compliance systems, and I built a marriage, and I built, apparently, a way out, all at the same time, because that's what I've always done, built the thing nobody else in the room thought to build. But I'm not staying up any longer to help you build yourself into someone your mother might have respected. That was never going to happen anyway. She didn't respect competence. She respected leverage. And tonight, for the first time in 6 years, I had more of it than she did. I looked at him one last time on that staircase, in the suit I chose on purpose, in the house that had never once felt like mine, and I said the only thing that felt true enough to leave him with. "I hope you find out who you are without her ledger running in the back of your head. I really do." But I already know who I am without it, and I found that out a long time before tonight. Comment the word reckoning if you believe some families only understand the truth once it costs them money instead of a marriage. I left the estate that night in the white suit I'd chosen on purpose, and I did not look back at the staircase, and I did not cry, because I had already spent the only tears that House was ever going to get from me, years earlier, alone, in a bathroom with the water running so no one would hear. Here is the part of this story that the gala didn't show you, because it happened quietly. The same way everything I ever built in that family happened quietly. 18 months before the audit landed, before Yerin Cho ever set foot in that ballroom, I had already started building something of my own. I used a severance clause from an earlier compliance contract, one Jaeho's father had signed with me personally, back when he still ran daily operations, back before his health declined, and Inho took the reins of the shipping side to found an independent maritime compliance consultancy called Carter Assurance Group. I built it in the evenings, after 12-hour days running Silver Crane's compliance division from a laptop at our kitchen table while Jaeho was in meetings I was never invited to. Carter Assurance Group did one thing, and it did it better than any firm on the eastern seaboard. It audited shipping insurance restructurings for exactly the kind of fraud that had just detonated in that ballroom. I built my client list the same way I built everything else in my life quietly, with precision, off the reputation of work nobody else wanted to do carefully. My first client was a mid-size freight forwarder in Savannah, a company run by a woman named Denise Okafor, who had been referred to me by a former colleague, and who paid me $800 for a single insurance restructuring audit that I completed in a single weekend, sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning after Jaeho had gone to bed, before either of us knew our marriage had an expiration. Date stamped somewhere on a document his mother had already signed. That $800 contract became a referral to a container leasing company in Charleston. That referral became a call from an insurance broker in Miami who needed someone who actually understood how customs fraud worked at the operational level, not just the legal level. By the time the gala happened, Carter Assurance Group had 11 clients, including 2 firms that had previously done business with Silver Crane and had grown wary of its insurance practices under Inho's management. Firms that had come to me specifically because they'd heard, through the tight, gossip-soaked world of Pacific shipping insurance, that there was a woman doing quiet, precise audit work, who didn't miss the details other firms glossed over. I never once told a client that I was married into the Kwon family. I built that reputation entirely under my own name, on my own merit, because I understood, long before the gala ever happened, that the day would come when I needed a version of myself that had nothing to do with anyone else's surname. I incorporated Carter Assurance Group in a state 2,000 miles from the Kwon estate, using a business address that was, for the first 18 months, a rented mailbox at a shipping and postal center 6 blocks from my old childhood home in Savannah. I filed every document myself. I paid the incorporation fees out of a savings account Jaeho didn't know existed, built $100 at a time out of consulting fees I never mentioned at dinner, because dinner in that house was not a place where you announced anything you weren't willing to have taken from you. 3 days after the audit collapsed the Kwon merger publicly, Richard Ashgrove, the underwriter who had stood up in that ballroom and killed the deal himself, called me directly. He didn't call to console me. He called because his firm needed an independent auditor they could actually trust for their next 12 maritime restructurings, and he had just watched me produce, in real time, the single most airtight piece of fraud documentation his firm had seen in a decade. Ashgrove Marine Assurance signed Carter Assurance Group to an exclusive 18-month audit contract worth $2 million, effective immediately. I want you to sit with that number for a second, because it is the exact kind of number that family only ever understood. 4 months after Madame Kwon told me a logistics manager does not make a Kwon, my own firm, the one I built at a kitchen table while she was planning a wedding for a woman who had invented her own name, signed a contract worth more than Silver Crane's entire legitimate freight division billed in a year. Not because I burned anything down out of anger, because I built something real while everyone in that house was busy building something fake, and the market, in the end, does not care whose name is on the door. It cares whether the paperwork is true. Silver Crane's insurance rating did not recover. It couldn't. The fraud had been too public, too documented, too thoroughly distributed to every underwriter in the Pacific shipping corridor. Within 4 months, 2 of their largest port contracts, the ones the Cho Maritime merger was supposed to secure, went instead to a competitor, a mid-tier logistics firm out of Yokohama that had spent the previous decade quietly building the exact reputation for clean paperwork that Silver Crane had spent the same decade quietly trading away. Inho, who had overruled every warning I'd given him for 6 years about customs paperwork, was removed from operational control of the shipping division by his own father's board, in a move that had nothing to do with loyalty and everything to do with the same balance sheet Madame Kwan had always worshipped finally turning against her own house. I heard the board meeting where it happened was brief. Jaeho's father, still recovering from his stroke but lucid enough to attend by video call, reportedly said only one sentence before the vote. "We spent 30 years building a reputation for reliability, and we let a fabricated engagement spend it in a single evening. This is not a mistake. I am willing to let this family make twice." Inho was reassigned to a regional subsidiary in Kaohsiung with a fraction of his previous authority. He has not spoken to Jaeho, according to a mutual acquaintance in the shipping insurance world, in over a year, because Jaeho was the one who ultimately voted with the board rather than defending his brother. The insurance downgrade that followed cost Silver Crane an estimated $19 million in the following fiscal year alone, in higher premiums, lost contracts, and the kind of reputational drag that doesn't show up on a balance sheet as a single line, but bleeds out of every negotiation for years afterward. I know these numbers not because I was still inside that family's business, but because Carter Assurance Group was, by then, the firm 3 separate underwriters called when they needed an honest read on exactly how bad a maritime insurance situation actually was. My name, the one Madame Kwan once said would never make a Kwan, had become the name underwriters trusted more than the Kwan name itself. Yerin Cho disappeared from public life within a week. I heard, second-hand, from a mutual contact in the underwriting world, that the reputation management firm she'd paid to construct her fabricated identity had also quietly filed a claim against her for non-payment on her final invoice, because apparently even the people you hire to build your image expect to be paid on time. What struck me most, when I learned the fuller shape of Yerin's story months later, was how much smaller the truth was than the fiction she'd built to replace it. She wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was a woman who had grown up watching her father lose his job over a cargo weight fraud he likely didn't even orchestrate himself, and had decided, somewhere along the way, that the only way to survive a world built on falsified paperwork was to falsify her own name loudly enough that no one would think to check it. I don't excuse what she did. She walked into my marriage, however broken it already was, with a fabricated identity built specifically to extract $40 million in insurance credibility from a family that never deserved to lose that money to a lie. But I understood her a little, in a way I never expected to. We had both been women handed nothing by that family except the option to build something false enough to survive inside it, or something true enough to survive outside it. I chose true. She chose false. Only one of those choices holds up under an audit. Madame Kwan has not spoken to me since that night. I don't imagine she ever will. But I heard, through the same underwriting circles that now call Carter Assurance Group before they call anyone else in the region, that she has told at least 2 business associates, in private, that hiring the American girl was the only decision in this family my husband ever got right, and I spent a decade trying to undo it. I don't need her to say it to my face. I have it from 3 separate sources, and honestly, that's about as close to an apology as that family was ever built to give. Jaeho reached out one more time, 4 months after the gala, when Silver Crane's board formally voted to bring in outside compliance leadership to try to stabilize the company's insurance standing. He asked, through a lawyer, whether Carter Assurance Group would consider a consulting contract with Silver Crane directly. I said yes. Not because I wanted him back. Not because there was a single unresolved feeling left in me that a contract could fix. I said yes because Carter Assurance Group takes clients based on the size of the invoice and the integrity of the paperwork, and Silver Crane, humbled and hemorrhaging insurance credibility, was finally willing to pay full audit rates and sign every compliance recommendation I made without a single overrule. The negotiation itself took place over 3 weeks, conducted entirely through lawyers on both sides, the way it should have been conducted from the start, 6 years earlier, if that family had ever once treated me like a professional instead of a wife who happened to be useful. My legal team, on Carter Assurance Group's behalf, insisted on full decision-making authority over every compliance recommendation, with no board overrule clause of any kind, the exact protection I had never had as an employee married into that family, the exact protection that would have prevented Inho's customs failures years earlier if anyone had thought to give it to me back then. Silver Crane's board, chastened and desperate to stop the bleeding, agreed to every term without a single round of pushback. We negotiated a 2-year contract worth $8 million. I signed it from my own office, in my own building, with my own name on the letterhead, and Jaeho signed it from across a conference table where he sat not as my husband, but as a client who needed something I built without him. Jaeho's hand shook slightly, signing his section of the contract, and I noticed it, the way I notice everything, without letting it change a single thing about how I proceeded. I signed my section without hesitation because I had spent 6 years learning exactly what my signature was worth, and I was not going to let a shaking hand across the table make me forget it now. I noticed, signing that contract, that the room was quiet in a completely different way than every room I had ever sat in during our marriage. There was no Madame Kwan reframing my presence as an inconvenience she was gracious enough to tolerate. There was no seating chart designed to remind me where I ranked. There was only a conference table, 2 sets of lawyers, and a set of numbers that had already decided, on their own, exactly how much my work was worth. It is a strange thing to finally receive in a courtroom quiet conference room the respect an entire family withheld from you across a marriage. I won't pretend it didn't feel like something, but it felt less like triumph and more like accuracy, like a scale finally settling at the number it should have read the whole time. He asked me, after the signing, if there was any chance. I told him the truth. The same way I've told you the truth for the length of this entire story. Jaeho, I don't hate you. I hope Silver Crane survives this, because a lot of good people work under that name who never made a single one of the decisions that got us here. But I built Carter Assurance Group in the exact hours your family taught me I wasn't worth including. I'm not walking back into a house that only valued me the day the balance sheet finally agreed with what I already knew about myself. I chose myself the night I set that folder down on the table. I'm not giving that back for a wedding ring. If you have ever built something real, quietly, while the people around you were busy building something fake and loud, you already know exactly what that quiet felt like. And you already know it was worth every hour it cost you. Carter Assurance Group operates out of a 19th floor office now, 6 blocks from the port I used to audit as an employee instead of an owner. My name is on the door in letters I chose myself. I don't wear white because it hides nothing anymore. I wear it because I like watching people underestimate a woman in a color that shows every mistake, right up until they read the audit she just handed them. I hired Denise Okafor, my very first client, as my head of client relations 8 months ago. I hired 2 junior auditors straight out of a maritime law program in Charleston, both of them women who told me, in their interviews, that they'd heard about Carter Assurance Group from a mentor who said it was the one firm in the region that would actually let a woman run her own audits without a man's name attached for credibility. I built that reputation on purpose. I wanted it to outlive the specific circumstances that forced me to build it in the first place. I still keep a single folder in a locked drawer in my new office, the same kind of drawer I once kept in the Kwan estate, the one room Madame Kwan never thought to search. It isn't the audit that ended the engagement. That one is long since filed, distributed, and closed. It's a folder of every spreadsheet I built in those first 6 years. Every $11 million savings calculation, every customs discrepancy I flagged and was overruled on, every piece of unglamorous, uncredited work that family absorbed into its own ledger and never once acknowledged as mine. I don't keep it out of bitterness. I keep it because it's the clearest proof I have of exactly how much value can move through a family's hands invisibly if the person doing the work never insists on her own name being attached to it. I keep it to remind myself, on the days the work gets long, exactly why I will never again build something valuable and let someone else's name be the only one on the door. I never went back to that estate. I never needed to. The staircase, the chandeliers, the marble floor that felt like something dead the last time I walked across it, none of it was ever the thing I was fighting for. I was fighting for the simple, unglamorous, unromantic right to be valued for what I actually built, instead of traded for what someone's mother thought would look better on a balance sheet. I got that. I got it in a 19-story building with my name on the lease, and I got it the exact way I built everything else in my life. Quietly, on purpose, with the paperwork to prove every word of it true. Some nights, walking out of that 19th floor office long after everyone else has gone home, I still catch myself checking the hallway for sound the way I used to check the halls of that estate, out of a habit 6 years deep that hasn't fully left my body yet. But the silence in my own building has never once felt like a threat. It just sounds like a place that's finally mine. If you've made it this far, you already know what this story is really about. It was never about a mafia husband or a fake heiress or a chandelier-lit staircase in a house that never belonged to me. It was about the 6 years I spent proving my worth to people who had already decided, long before I walked through their door, that no amount of proof would ever be enough for them. And it was about the one night I stopped trying to prove it to them and started proving it, instead, to myself.